He was just a man in a wheelchair who thought he'd lost everything, his past, his purpose, even his faith. Then, at a quiet animal rescue exhibit, a golden retriever named Bailey walked up, rested her head on his lap, and changed everything. What if the dog you loved as a child never forgot you? What if, by the grace of God, she came back when you needed her most? This isn't just a story about a man and a dog. It's about memory, redemption, and the quiet ways God reminds us we're never truly alone. If this touched your heart, share this video with someone who might need it. Comment below if you've ever experienced a moment that felt like a miracle. Subscribe for more healing stories, and may God bless every soul watching this. If you believe love never dies, type Amen. The early afternoon sun casts a soft golden light over Savannah, Georgia, softening the edges of the historic city's cobblestone streets and wrought iron balconies. Moss hangs from ancient oak trees, swaying gently in the warm autumn breeze that carries a hint of salt from the nearby shore. The city's charm is undeniable, like a living postcard, but for Lucas Bennett, it has become a place of silence and seclusion rather than beauty. Lucas maneuvered his wheelchair down the brick-paved walkway of Forsyth Park, his breath measured, his fingers gripping the wheels with a steadiness learned from months of practice. At 32, Lucas had the kind of face that seemed older than it should have. Handsome, yes, with a strong jaw and deep-set hazel eyes, but shadowed by fatigue and loss. His dark hair, once meticulously styled, now curled a bit too long at the collar, a reminder of how often he neglected the small things. The lower half of his body hadn't moved in nearly 18 months, ever since the accident. The accident. He never said it out loud. It was as though naming it would breathe life into something he'd rather let die. Once a rising architect, Lucas had been preparing a presentation for a major sustainable housing project. His mother, Amy Bennett, a gentle yet fiercely determined woman in her late 50s, had insisted on picking him up from the university late that night. The roads had been slick from a sudden rainstorm, and the drunk driver who ran the red light had never even braked. Amy died instantly. Lucas survived barely. The grief of losing his mother and the reality of paralysis had carved silence into his soul. For months, he refused visitors. Therapy sessions were battles. Friendships thinned like old paper. Only recently, at the insistence of his physical therapist, had he begun venturing out again. And this visit to the Savannah Wildlife Renewal exhibit, a temporary installation set up in a section of Forsyth Park, was his first real step toward re-entering the world. The exhibit itself was meant to showcase rehabilitated animals, rescued from abuse, neglect, or abandonment, and educate the public about their emotional intelligence. While families with children wandered toward the otter pools and aviary gardens, Lucas wheeled himself toward a quieter section labeled Therapy Companions, the Animals That Heal. The open enclosure was ringed by waist-high wooden fencing, with soft hay laid across the ground and shaded canopies strung from poles. Within the pen were a few benches and a single, soft-eyed golden retriever, sitting perfectly still near the far corner. She wasn't tied or crated. She didn't pace or bark. She simply sat, tail tucked loosely beside her, watching. Bailey. Her name was painted on a wooden placard beside the entrance. Lucas read the short description. Golden Retriever, 9 years old. Former therapy dog for children's recovery programs. Rescued after abandonment. Currently part of our emotional observation program. Lucas stared. There was something in Bailey's posture, calm but alert, vulnerable yet composed, that stirred an old echo in his chest. Her coat was a deep honey gold, thick and slightly curly around her ears and tail. She had a long, elegant snout with the faintest gray frosting around her muzzle, and large, soulful brown eyes that seemed too knowing, too familiar. Bailey blinked once, then twice. Her head tilted. Lucas didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until his lungs burned for air. He wheeled closer. The sound of tires over mulch caught the attention of Dr. Mariah Evans, a veterinarian in her early 40s, who had been adjusting some paperwork at the side of the enclosure. Dr. Evans was tall and lean, with sharp features softened by an expressive kindness in her gaze. Her auburn hair was tied back in a no-nonsense bun, and she wore a practical gray vest over her scrubs. Years of fieldwork and emotional labor had shaped her into a woman of quiet resilience, one who preferred action over words and truth over comfort. She looked up and offered a warm but measured smile. "First time visiting?" she asked, her voice calm low. Lucas nodded. "First time, out really." Her eyes flicked toward Bailey. "She noticed you right away." "That's rare." Lucas glanced back. Bailey had stood up now, slowly, and was walking toward him, not eagerly but deliberately, as though testing a memory. When she reached him, she didn't jump or bark. Instead, she gently placed her chin on his knee and looked up at him, eyes soft and searching. Lucas froze. His hand moved instinctively toward her head, fingers brushing her fur. It was warm, coarse on the surface but softer underneath. Bailey let out a small sigh and closed her eyes. Lucas felt something crack inside him. Not pain, not sadness, something older, something almost like recognition. "She never does that," Dr. Evans murmured, stepping closer. "Bailey is very selective. She usually keeps to herself." Lucas didn't answer. His throat was thick with memory. He thought of his mother, Amy, guiding his child-sized wheelchair down endless hospital corridors. He remembered her voice singing off-key to distract him from needles, her hands always warm, always there. He remembered one specific day, a fuzzy memory of being at a different center, somewhere outside the city. A therapy session with animals. He had been afraid of the big dogs. All but one, a golden retriever. Quiet, gentle, with eyes just like these. "Did she ever work with children?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Dr. Evans nodded. "Yes. For nearly 6 years, she was part of a mobility and trauma recovery program. She was stationed at the Willow Grove Children's Hospital, just outside Jacksonville. Specialized in kids with PTSD and physical disabilities. Then something happened. She went missing during a transition between programs. We don't know exactly what occurred. Someone abandoned her. She was found 6 months later, underweight and wandering near a rest stop in North Carolina. The identification chip was outdated, but the behavior markers were still there. She hadn't forgotten how to love." Lucas swallowed hard. "I think I've met her before," he whispered. Dr. Evans didn't question it. She simply nodded again. "She seems to think so too." Bailey lifted her head from his lap and licked his hand once, then returned to resting her chin on his knee, eyes closed, as if she'd waited long enough. Bailey's chin remained on Lucas's knee, her warm breath puffing gently through the fabric of his jeans, as if she had no intention of moving anytime soon. For Lucas, it felt like the world had quieted around them. The bustling noises of Forsyth Park faded, the laughter of children, the buzz of nearby conversation, even the wind seemed to hush. Only the rhythmic rise and fall of Bailey's breath and the fragile pounding of his own heart remained. Dr. Mariah Evans stood nearby, arms loosely crossed over her gray vest, observing the interaction with furrowed brows that weren't laced with concern, but rather with a quiet astonishment. "She's never done that," she repeated, more to herself than anyone else. Lucas reached down and laid his hand gently along Bailey's neck. She leaned into the touch, letting out a low, almost imperceptible hum, a dog's version of a sigh. Her coat was thick, slightly wavy, the kind of golden hue that glowed warm in sunlight. She smelled faintly of hay and cedar shavings, and something older still, like memory. "I used to have a dog like this," Lucas said after a moment, his voice quiet, as though he didn't want to disturb the fragile magic of the moment. "When I was little, a golden retriever. I don't remember much about him, or her. I can't even recall the name. Just flashes. Running in the yard. Licking my fingers after peanut butter. Curled up under my bed when I had nightmares." Dr. Evans stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the mulch. "Do you remember what happened to the dog?" Lucas shook his head. "I was very young. Maybe 5 or 6. My mom said we had to give the dog away after we moved into the apartment building. Strict no-pet policy. I don't think I ever really got over that." "You were close," she said, her voice carrying a new softness. "The bond between children and dogs can be stronger than people realize." especially when that bond forms around a need for comfort, for stability. Lucas nodded, his gaze still on Bailey. It's strange. I look at her, and I get this feeling like I know her. Like I've seen those eyes before. Dr. Evans studied him carefully. There's a theory, she said thoughtfully, that dogs remember emotional imprints more than visual ones. The same way children can't recall specific events, but retain the feelings attached to them. Maybe what you're recognizing isn't her. Maybe it's who you were when you last felt this. Lucas didn't reply. He couldn't. A lump had formed in his throat. Bailey, sensing the shift, gave his wrist a soft nudge with her snout, and then rested her head against his thigh again. I'd like to come back, Lucas said finally, his voice low. Is that possible? Of course. Dr. Evans smiled gently. We're open every day this month. You'd be very welcome. The next morning, Lucas returned. And the day after that, each time, Bailey was waiting, sometimes lying under the shade of the canopy, sometimes perched near the fence as if watching for someone. Each time she saw him, she would rise and walk, never run, directly to his side and sit. By the end of the week, other staff and volunteers had started noticing. Hank Reynolds, a gruff but good-hearted groundskeeper in his late 60s with a long gray ponytail and hands as wide as shovels, made a point to mention it when he brought over fresh hay one afternoon. Don't usually see her warm up like that, he muttered, squinting against the sun. She's picky. Didn't even like me, till I started bringing her chicken jerky. She's never reacted this way with anyone? Lucas asked. Nope. Not since she got here. Skittish at first. Didn't trust men especially. Don't know what they did to her before we found her, but it must have been real bad. He paused. But she likes you. That's clear enough. Lucas looked at Bailey, who was currently lying at his feet, one paw draped over the edge of his wheelchair's footrest. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it too. The connection wasn't logical. It wasn't even comforting at first. It was unnerving, like brushing up against something sacred, something meant. That weekend, Lucas sat with Dr. Evans again in a shaded alcove near the main path. She'd brought a folder filled with Bailey's behavioral reports and medical records. Her professional side was in full force now, analytical, precise, but the kindness in her manner never dimmed. This may sound odd, she said, thumbing through a page, but I've started documenting this. Lucas arched a brow. Documenting what? You and Bailey. Your interactions. Not in a clinical sense. More observational. There's something significant here. You know how some therapy animals attach to certain patients? But this feels reciprocal. Lucas nodded. It does, but it also feels unfinished. Like we're only seeing the surface. Dr. Evans looked thoughtful. There's a name in her early records. A handler, Diego Rivas. He trained her in Florida during her initial certification. We lost track of him after the program he worked for shut down. But he was the one who wrote, Bailey has a memory like a lantern. She holds light for people long after they've left the room. I always thought it was poetic. Now I'm starting to wonder if it was literal. Lucas smiled faintly. That's beautiful. He thought she had an unusual attachment style. Said she imprinted on specific children and would remember them even years later. That's not typical for most therapy dogs. Lucas looked down at Bailey, who opened one eye sleepily at the sound of his name. She's not typical, he murmured. Later that day, Lucas wheeled himself back to the edge of the enclosure, just as the sun began to dip behind the magnolia trees. Families had thinned out, and the park had grown quiet again. Bailey was curled beside him, her fur catching the orange light like spun honey. For the first time in a long time, Lucas felt settled. Not healed, not whole, but like a piece of him had found its match. As he sat there, a woman passed by pushing a stroller and paused to watch the pair. Her daughter, a toddler with wispy brown curls, pointed at Bailey and squealed. "Doggy," she exclaimed. Bailey raised her head, but didn't move. Lucas gave a small wave, and the woman smiled and continued on. "I don't think I want to let her go," he said aloud, mostly to himself. And as if she understood, Bailey gently nudged his arm again, her tail sweeping slowly once across the ground. It was a Sunday afternoon in Forsyth Park, and the autumn sun was softer than usual, casting a warm, honey-colored hue through the lace of Spanish moss swaying overhead. The breeze brought with it a scent of roasted peanuts and distant music, probably from a saxophonist playing near the fountain. Lucas wheeled himself past the garden beds toward the therapy companion's enclosure. It had been nearly 2 weeks since his first encounter with Bailey, and though he told himself he was just there to observe the animals, the truth had long since changed. He was there for her. Today, however, the park was unusually crowded. A local parenting blog had written a glowing article about the wildlife renewal exhibit, and families had turned out in droves. Children ran between exhibits, cotton candy in hand, parents juggled strollers and juice boxes, and the atmosphere buzzed with overstimulation. Lucas hated crowds. He hadn't realized it until the laughter became shrill, the heat too thick, the sound of a balloon popping in the distance too much like a gunshot. His breathing grew shallow. His fingers gripped the wheels too tight. His vision narrowed, tunneled. Somewhere in his chest, a panic began to swell. As he turned the corner toward Bailey's pen, a group of children surged ahead of him. A boy tripped over the front of Lucas's wheelchair, falling to the ground with a shriek. Lucas instinctively jerked backward, heart slamming, and suddenly everything spun. The world tilted. The edge of the enclosure fence hit his shoulder. The wheels caught on uneven mulch. And before he could call out, his body slid sideways, toppling out of the chair in a twisted, graceless fall. Gasps echoed from nearby. Someone yelled. Somewhere a woman screamed, "Call for help!" But Lucas heard none of it. The world had gone fuzzy, his ears filling with a high, static whine. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His body was on the ground, helpless, vulnerable, and the sky was too wide, too bright. And then she came. Bailey. She bounded over the enclosure fence without hesitation. The wooden slats barely flexed under her weight as she leapt, landing beside Lucas in a graceful, practiced motion. No barking, no panic, just purpose. She circled him once, sniffing quickly, and then did something no one expected. Bailey lay down across his chest. Not fully, a dog her size would have crushed him, but just enough that her weight applied steady, calming pressure. Her side pressed into his ribs. Her head rested near his collarbone. She didn't move. She didn't even look around. She anchored him, and the panic broke. The static in his ears faded. The breath returned, shallow but real. The trembling stopped. Lucas blinked slowly, tears clinging to his lashes, and saw the soft golden blur of her fur. He felt her warmth, her heartbeat, and in that moment something split open. A memory, faint but real. A hospital room. He was small, curled on a wide bed with cold sheets. Tubes in his arm. Shadows dancing on the ceiling. Crying, not loud, just soft, hopeless sobs. And beside him, curled up gently, was a golden retriever, her fur warm against his cheek. She didn't bark, didn't move, just stayed. Just like this. It was her. It had to be her. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. He reached out with one trembling hand and buried his fingers in her fur. Bailey licked his wrist once, then settled again. Dr. Evans arrived moments later, followed by 2 security staff and a worried woman carrying a walkie-talkie. Mariah dropped to her knees beside them, eyes wide but steady. "Don't touch him," she ordered the staff. "She's stabilizing him. Give them a moment." The crowd had gone silent. Children stood frozen. Parents whispered. Phones hovered, some recording, most lowered in awe. Sarah Monroe, the event coordinator, stood behind the security tape that had hastily been set up. She was in her mid-30s, petite but sharp-eyed, with perfectly styled curls and a clipboard she never let go of. Her voice was firm but not unkind as she began ushering onlookers away, her tone practiced from years of managing chaotic school fairs and citywide parades. Behind her polished exterior was a single mother raising 2 children on her own, one of whom struggled with severe anxiety. She recognized panic when she saw it, and what she'd witnessed in Bailey chilled her in the best way. "That dog just saved him," she whispered. Dr. Evans waited until Lucas's breathing evened before placing a hand on his shoulder. "Can you hear me, Lucas?" He nodded. "Do you want me to help you sit up?" He nodded again. Bailey slowly stood and stepped aside, but stayed close, her tail barely wagging, controlled, observant, ready. With Mariah's help, Lucas sat upright, still shaking but present. "I'm okay," he whispered, then added more firmly, "I'm okay." A wheelchair was brought over. Dr. Evans gently helped guide him back into it. Bailey immediately positioned herself beside the left wheel, as if claiming a post she hadn't held in years. "Is she trained for this?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. Dr. Evans answered slowly. "She was. Years ago. But this was instinct. Or memory. Or something deeper." Lucas placed a hand on Bailey's head. "She remembered," he murmured. Mariah met his gaze. "So did you." The following morning, the air in Savannah had turned crisp and clean, the kind of early autumn morning where breath came in visible puffs and fallen leaves crunched underfoot like brittle memories. The crowds from the weekend had vanished, replaced by the quiet murmur of weekday visitors, mostly elderly couples walking hand in hand and parents with toddlers too young for school. The wildlife renewal exhibit was peaceful again, and Lucas returned not as a casual visitor, but as someone tethered to something he didn't yet understand. Bailey greeted him the moment his wheelchair rolled into view, rising from her spot beneath the enclosure's magnolia tree. She trotted to the fence, tail swaying in lazy arcs, then nudged the gate latch with her nose. A volunteer, an older woman with soft silver hair tied in a loose bun, unlatched the gate and let Bailey through. "Morning, Miss Karen," Lucas said, smiling warmly. Karen Reynolds, one of the longest-serving volunteers at the center, was a widow in her early 70s with a quiet grace and gentle eyes that seemed to hold stories she didn't often share. She stood about 5'3", thin but spry, always dressed in faded denim and wool sweaters too large for her frame. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and spoke with a voice like warm chamomile tea. Life had been kind to her in some ways, cruel in others. Her husband, a Vietnam veteran, had died of ALS nearly 15 years ago, and since then, Karen had devoted herself entirely to animal rehabilitation. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "Bailey's been waiting for you." Practically paced the whole fence since dawn. Lucas chuckled softly as Bailey curled beside him. "She remembers everything, doesn't she?" Karen's eyes lingered on them a second longer than usual. There was a shift in her expression, something uncertain flickering across her brow. "You look familiar, you know," she said suddenly. "I've been trying to place it since last week. Thought maybe I was imagining things. But just now, seeing the two of you together, it hit me." Lucas tilted his head. "You've met me before?" She nodded slowly, her hand absently stroking Bailey's ears. "It was a long time ago. Over 20 years, maybe more. You were just a little boy then, tiny thing, maybe 5 or 6. In a wheelchair like now, but smaller. Your mama used to bring you here, when the place was still run out of that converted barn down on Wilkes Street. Back then we didn't have fences or organized exhibitions, just a few animals recovering from injury and a lot of hope." Lucas blinked. "My mother? Amy?" Karen's smile widened. "Amy Patterson. Red curls. Wore that lemon-yellow coat, no matter the weather. She was lovely. Worked as a nurse, I believe." Lucas nodded, his throat tightening. "She passed away when I was 12. "I'm so sorry to hear that." Karen's voice softened, her gaze distant for a moment. "She adored you. Always brought you here after your therapy sessions. Said the animals calmed your nerves better than anything doctors could prescribe." Lucas looked down at Bailey. She had rested her chin on the edge of his footrest, eyes closed, ears twitching as if she still remembered every sound from those early days. "There was a pup," Karen continued, her tone nostalgic. "Golden retriever. Smart, even then. She was the first dog we ever trained for child therapy. It was a test run, really. Nobody thought it would work, not with such a young dog. But your mama believed it. She said the pup had a gentleness about her, like she understood things she couldn't be taught." Lucas's heart thudded. "Are you saying that dog was Bailey?" Karen hesitated, then motioned for him to follow her. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." They wheeled across the grounds to a modest brown building with peeling white trim, the original caretaker's cabin now repurposed as a storage and archive room. Inside, the air was musty and filled with the comforting scent of paper, cedar, and old wool. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with manila folders, faded photos, and dusty ledgers. Karen knelt beside a file cabinet and flipped through several folders before pulling out a weathered envelope. She opened it carefully, the paper crackling, and drew out a single photo. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed it to Lucas. The image was slightly overexposed and curled at the edges. A child, no older than 5, sat in a wheelchair, arms wrapped tightly around a golden puppy no larger than a pillow. The boy's face was round with wide eyes and a gap-toothed smile. Standing behind them, a woman with fiery red curls and warm hazel eyes beamed at the camera, her hand resting protectively on her son's shoulder. Lucas swallowed hard. "That's me. That's my mom." Karen nodded. "And that," she said, pointing at the puppy nestled against the boy's chest, "is Bailey." The photo trembled in Lucas's grip as his eyes filled with tears. "She waited for me," he whispered. All this time, she remembered. And she waited. Bailey had followed them into the room and now rested her head against Lucas's leg once more, as if to say, "Yes, I did." Karen wiped her eyes discreetly and stood up. "You two were inseparable. Even back then. She used to cry when you left. We didn't understand it at the time. But maybe some things don't need to be understood." Lucas stared at the photo for a long time. Something deep within him clicked into place. A lost puzzle piece of identity returned. The child in that picture was still part of him, and the dog, this dog, had never let go of that bond. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for keeping this, for remembering." Karen smiled and squeezed his shoulder. Some stories deserve to be told twice. The days in Savannah began to shift, not just in temperature but in rhythm. Mornings arrived with a low golden mist, drifting lazily through the tall pines like a half-forgotten melody. For Lucas, these days brought something entirely new, a reason to rise early, to leave the house, to feel again. Bailey was now no longer just a dog at the Wildlife Renewal Center. She was his dog, though the paperwork said otherwise. The connection between them defied labels. It was wordless, ancient, and stitched with threads that neither time nor distance could unravel. Each morning, Lucas arrived promptly at 8:30, bundled in a navy jacket over a charcoal gray hoodie. His fingers, though stiff from colder air, always carried a treat in his coat pocket, Bailey's favorite, sweet potato slices baked until chewy. The moment she spotted him from across the therapy enclosure, she would lift her head, tail already thumping, and trot toward him with a gait that felt like reunion. This routine, unofficial at first, became a fixture. Eventually, Dr. Evans, tall, thoughtful, always carrying a small notebook in his back pocket, approached Lucas with a proposal. "We've been studying therapy animal behaviors in controlled settings," he said one morning, crouching beside Lucas as Bailey leaned gently against the side of the wheelchair. "But what you two have, it's not textbook. It's personal. Would you consider participating in a pilot study?" Lucas looked down at Bailey. She was resting her chin lightly on his knee, exhaling a steady stream of warm breath through her nose. "You think there's something here?" "I know there is," Dr. Evans replied. "She only does this with you. The pressure, the quiet contact, like she's tuning in to your emotional frequency." Lucas gave a soft smile. "She's the one doing the therapy, not me." Dr. Evans chuckled. "You'd be surprised. The bond heals both ways." The doctor's background was in behavioral neuroscience, but he never came off as clinical. In his mid-40s, with flecks of gray beginning to streak his temples, he wore boots covered in red Georgia clay and spoke with the softness of someone who had spent years listening more than instructing. After a career spent in laboratories, he had moved to Savannah to escape a collapsing marriage and find meaning in field research. The Renewal Center had been his second chance. He saw in Lucas and Bailey what he'd lost in sterile academic walls: connection. The program they developed together was simple. Lucas would visit daily. His interactions with Bailey would be observed, sometimes filmed. He would journal his emotions, and Dr. Evans would track Bailey's behavioral cues: breathing rhythms, ear twitching, duration of contact. The idea was to study emotional transference between a human survivor of trauma and an animal with a possible memory-linked attachment. Sarah Monroe, the event coordinator, helped streamline the paperwork. Dressed in tailored beige slacks and a moss-green knit scarf, she arrived with her ever-present clipboard and reading glasses perched on her head like a crown of competence. Sarah had grown more protective of the program in recent weeks, driven perhaps by her own personal investment. Her teenage daughter, Emily, had been quietly attending art therapy at the center since her father's passing. "Lucas," Sarah said as she handed him the signed consent form, "thank you for being part of this. You're helping more people than you realize." Lucas wasn't sure about that. Most days, he still felt like a mosaic of broken parts, loosely held together by hope and the softness of a golden coat pressed against his side. One afternoon, he arrived to find Bailey already sitting at the gate, as if anticipating his mood. It had been a hard night. The dreams were vivid again: twisted wreckage, the screech of tires, his mother's voice calling his name, and then silence. Lucas didn't speak as he approached. He didn't need to. Bailey rose, walked out, and circled behind him. Gently, she nudged his side until her body pressed against the curve of the wheelchair. She walked beside him like a quiet escort, step for step, guiding him toward their favorite bench under the big oak tree. Once there, she sat, and Lucas rested a hand on her back. The tremor in his wrist faded. His breathing slowed. They sat like that for 20 minutes, no words, no movements, just the steady pulse of two beings tethered by something neither of them could explain. That moment became a pattern. Dr. Evans began to record specific behavior entries. October 17th, Bailey approached with lowered head. Rested against Lucas's thigh for 17 minutes. No cues given. Lucas reported feeling anchored. October 21st, Lucas became emotional mid-session. Journal confirmed memory flashback. Bailey responded by licking his wrist, then placing head gently in his lap. Consistent with deep therapeutic bond. October 24th, when Lucas did not arrive on time, Bailey showed pacing behavior, low whine. Ceased upon his arrival. This anticipatory anxiety reflects attachment mirroring. In the afternoons, Sarah often brought her daughter Emily to the adjacent garden to sketch. Emily, a girl of 15 with raven-black hair and delicate features, rarely spoke aloud since her father's sudden stroke. But she always looked over when Bailey and Lucas passed, eyes wide with something like longing. One day, Lucas rolled by and offered her a small wave. She nodded once, and Lucas noticed her sketchpad. She had drawn Bailey twice. Once as a puppy, curled beside a child in a hospital bed, and once as she was now, walking beside a man in a wheelchair under a magnolia tree. The detail was uncanny. Lucas didn't ask how she knew. That night, he opened his journal and wrote, "She knows something. Maybe we all do. Maybe healing doesn't always need to be spoken. Maybe it's memory passed through hands and paws and pencil lines." At the end of the week, Dr. Evans asked if he would be open to expanding the sessions, possibly allowing Bailey supervised visits outside the center. Lucas agreed without hesitation. "I think she remembers the world with me in it," he said. "And you?" the doctor asked. Lucas smiled softly. "I'm starting to remember the world with her in it too." The air in Savannah had begun to carry a sharper edge, that late autumn crispness that turned tree lines into brushstrokes of ochre and rust. The Wildlife Renewal Center remained peaceful in the mornings, but there was something restless inside Lucas, as if Bailey's presence had unearthed a long-buried thread and tugged gently at it, one that led backward, not forward. Since their connection had grown stronger and the therapy study more structured, Lucas had started asking questions. How could Bailey still remember him after all these years? How did a dog that was supposedly trained decades ago find her way back into his life at just the right moment? The center had few records, most predating the digital era. But after a conversation with Karen one quiet morning over tea in the volunteer lounge, she returned from the archives with a manila envelope in her hand. "There's not much," she said, placing it in his lap. But if anyone would remember Bailey from those early days, it's him. Inside was a scanned intake form from 20 years prior. At the bottom, barely legible through faded ink, was the name, Diego Rivas, lead canine behaviorist. A phone number and a physical address in Texas were scribbled in the margins in blue ink. Karen offered a cautious smile. He was young back then, brilliant with dogs. A bit off-grid these days, I hear. Lucas spent that evening searching online. There were no social media accounts, no formal veterinary practice. But after 2 hours of sifting through nonprofit registries and local Texas articles, he found a name that matched. Diego Rivas, founder of Rivas Rescue Ranch, Austin, Texas. The accompanying photo was old, but the face was striking, tan complexion, curly dark hair graying at the temples, a worn but sincere smile, and a weathered denim shirt with rolled sleeves revealing inked forearms. The article mentioned he ran a modest rescue ranch outside the city limits, specializing in behavioral rehabilitation for abandoned working dogs. Lucas wrote an email that night. A short, honest message. My name is Lucas Patterson. I believe you trained a dog named Bailey 20 years ago. She found her way back to me. He didn't expect a reply, but the next morning there it was. Subject, Bailey? From the Wilkes program? Lucas. Yes. I remember her. I remember your mother. She was extraordinary. So was Bailey. I didn't think I'd hear about her again. Call me, please. Lucas called immediately. The voice on the other end was warm, calm, and slightly raspy, like someone who spent their life outdoors speaking to animals more than people. You're not mistaken, Diego said. If she came back to you, it's no accident. Diego Rivas was in his early 50s now, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face lined by sun and time, but a voice filled with the quiet authority of someone who never spoke unless it mattered. He told Lucas he'd trained hundreds of dogs over the years, but Bailey had been different, chosen not just for her breed, but for her inexplicable ability to attune to emotional distress. She was maybe 6 weeks old when she came to the program, Diego said. Most pups are skittish or overactive, but Bailey, she'd lie beside a crying child without needing instruction. She'd just know. Your mother saw that before I did. Amy said Bailey reminded her of hope. Lucas's heart ached. You remember my mom? I met her once, Diego replied. She brought you in after a therapy session. You were so small, scared of everything except the dog. Amy held your hand and just smiled. That's all I needed to see. I remember thinking, whatever trauma that child's been through, that woman's love will bring him back. Lucas was silent for a long moment. Then he said, she didn't get the chance. I know, Diego replied gently. Life steals what it wants, but sometimes it gives something back. They spoke for over an hour. Diego told him about his ranch. 20 acres outside Austin, no signage, just open land and fencing held together by goodwill and rust. Most of his rescues were retired service dogs or animals too difficult for average adopters. He lived in a small wooden cabin with 3 rescue dogs of his own. Lobo, a one-eyed husky with a stubborn streak, Marisol, a shepherd lab mix missing a hind leg, and Tucker, a senior bloodhound who could still track tears in a hurricane. You should come out sometime, Diego offered. Not just for Bailey's sake. I think you'd find some answers here. Lucas hesitated. Travel was hard in his condition. But the seed was planted. That evening, Lucas wheeled out to the center's main yard as the sun dipped low, casting a watercolor glow over the grass. Bailey followed him, as always, lying down beside him like a golden shadow. You knew him, didn't you? Lucas whispered, running his hand through her fur. You knew I needed to remember. As if in answer, Bailey shifted and rested her head on his chest, exactly where his heartbeat was loudest. The package arrived 2 days later in a plain brown envelope, worn at the corners and taped hastily at the seams, as though its sender had wrestled with whether to send it at all. Lucas found it waiting at the front desk of the Wildlife Renewal Center when he came for his morning session with Bailey. Sarah handed it to him with her usual efficiency, her tall frame bent slightly as she leaned across the reception counter, eyes curious but respectful. From Texas, she said simply. Lucas sat beneath the old oak tree where he and Bailey always met, the golden leaves whispering above, and opened the envelope with cautious fingers. Inside was a faded green leather photo album, its edges curled and brittle. A short note lay on top, written in ink that looked like it had been touched by the same years that had shaped the man who sent it. Lucas, I thought you deserved to have this more than I did. I've held on to it all these years, maybe waiting for a reason. Maybe this is it. I hope it brings you more comfort than it did me. Diego Lucas opened the album. The first photo was simple, a golden puppy curled beside a row of children's legs, all seated cross-legged on foam mats in a sunny room. Bailey, unmistakable even in puppyhood, had those same wise, liquid eyes that even then seemed to hold more story than one life could possibly explain. Page after page, the photos told a quiet narrative. Bailey with children in wheelchairs. Bailey asleep beside hospital beds. Bailey licking tears from cheeks. And then, about halfway through, Lucas's breath caught. There he was, maybe 5 years old. His hair was longer, sun-streaked and messy, his legs frail and locked into orthopedic braces. But his smile was unmistakable, wide and open in a way he hadn't seen in himself for years. Bailey sat beside him, tail a golden blur, tongue lolling, eyes trained on him like he was the center of her small universe. In the background, standing with one hand lightly on his shoulder and the other holding a clipboard, was his mother. Amy Patterson had been a registered nurse, tall and graceful, with kind green eyes and a freckle just beneath her left brow. In the photo, her smile was more than posed. It was protective, proud, and weary in the way only caregivers learn to be. She wore a loose cardigan over her scrubs, her ID badge clipped at the neckline. Tucked into the back pocket of the album was a folded piece of stationery. The handwriting was familiar. Lucas had seen it on old recipe cards and school permission slips. But here, it was softer, more intimate. October 6th, 2003. Today, Lucas didn't cry during therapy. He even laughed when Bailey knocked over the box of blocks. She's the only one who can make him forget the pain for even a minute. I've never seen a bond like this. I asked if we could keep her, but Dr. Rivas said she was needed here for more children like Lucas. Maybe one day, when we're both stronger, we'll come back for her. But Lucas got a fever again. We have to leave early tomorrow. Maybe we'll never come back. I don't know how to explain to him why she can't come home with us. Amy Lucas read the note over and over, the ink smudging slightly under his fingers as he tried to reconcile the present with the past. His mother had wanted Bailey, not just for a day or a weekend. She had tried to bring her home. And for whatever reason, his illness, his recovery, they'd never returned. He looked over at Bailey, who was now resting at his feet, her head gently touching the side of his wheelchair, eyes closed but ears alert to his every breath. She had waited. Somehow she had waited. Later that day, Lucas sat in Dr. Evans's office and handed over the album. The doctor leafed through it reverently, stopping at the page with the note. She knew, Dr. Evans murmured. Your mother knew what Bailey could be for you. And Bailey, she remembered. Lucas nodded. This isn't just about healing anymore. It's memory, legacy. They agreed to include the photos and notes in the behavioral study, not just as supporting material, but as the emotional foundation of the entire project. Sarah joined them briefly to discuss expanding the program. Dressed in a navy blouse and slim khakis, her hair pulled back in a braid that revealed the light streak of silver running through the side, she looked tired but hopeful. People respond to stories more than science, she said. If we can show them what this bond really is, we might change how therapy animals are seen, not as tools, but as family. Lucas looked at the photo again, his 5-year-old self, smiling through pain, with Bailey pressed close and his mother's hand on his shoulder. He suddenly felt not just connected, but whole, as if a circle long left open had finally drawn itself closed. That evening, he brought the album home. He placed it on the table beside his mother's framed photo, lit a candle, and whispered, "We made it back, Mom." She came home. The morning sky over Savannah was streaked with pale rose and indigo when Lucas wheeled himself across the dew-kissed path for the last time. The Wildlife Renewal Center, usually brimming with school groups and volunteers, was unusually quiet. A hush of anticipation hung in the air, as though even the trees understood something sacred was about to end and begin. Bailey walked beside him, her golden coat gleaming in the filtered sunlight, tail swishing gently with each step. She no longer wore the green therapy dog vest. That had been retired days earlier. From now on, she would just be Bailey, his dog, his family. Sarah stood by the loading area, clipboard in hand. Her tall frame, usually composed and brisk, seemed softened today. She wore a navy coat buttoned all the way up despite the mild weather. Her gray-streaked braid hung down her shoulder, and when she met Lucas's eyes, she smiled. Not the administrative smile of daily duty, but one touched with gratitude and sorrow. "The transport team just confirmed arrival in Tennessee," she said. "It's a beautiful space. You'll love it there." Lucas nodded. "I won't just visit," he replied. "I'm moving. I've already transferred my remote work status to the area. I want to be where she is." Sarah reached into the side pocket of her coat and handed him a sealed envelope. "From Dr. Evans. He said you should open it on the road." A few volunteers gathered to say goodbye. Some younger college interns who had fed Bailey on rainy days. Others older folks who had known her longer than they'd known each other. One of them, a short woman with auburn curls and reading glasses that always slid down her nose, handed Lucas a thermos. "Chamomile. You'll need it," she whispered. The van that would take Bailey to Tennessee was modest, painted a soft forest green with the logo of the Healing Paws Sanctuary etched on the side. Inside, there were padded beds, temperature controls, and even a small camera to live stream the journey to receiving staff. This wasn't just any transfer, it was a ceremony. As Lucas helped Bailey into the van and sat beside her, he thought of the photo album, the letters, the memories. Of his mother and her soft hand on his shoulder. Of the day he'd collapsed, and Bailey had protected him with nothing but instinct and love. Every step that led them here felt stitched together by something greater than logic, perhaps memory or faith, or the unseen threads of a shared journey too sacred for words. The ride was long but quiet. Bailey curled beside him, resting her head on his lap, eyes flickering open now and then to confirm his presence. As miles rolled by, Savannah's oak-lined streets fading into the long highways of Georgia, Lucas opened Dr. Evans's envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper, handwritten in crisp blue ink. "Lucas, some bonds don't need definition to be real. What you and Bailey have is proof of something deeper than protocol or training. She remembers you, and now you remember her. That's more than most people get in this life. I've spoken with the Healing Paws Board. They want you to head the new Companion Legacy program, a pilot project built entirely around your story. If you're ready, it's yours. Stay brave. She's already taught you how. Drive E." By the time they arrived at the sanctuary in the foothills of eastern Tennessee, the sun had dipped low, casting a golden hue across the hills. Healing Paws was nestled between wildflower meadows and soft pine woods. The buildings were all cedar and glass, designed to blend into nature. And in the distance, Lucas could see fenced spaces where other senior therapy animals were gently lounging or exploring. A woman with deep brown skin and warm hazel eyes met them at the entrance. She introduced herself as Clara Jennings, the new director of operations. Clara was in her mid-40s, with a calm presence that wrapped around you like a weighted blanket. "We've been waiting," she said, kneeling to greet Bailey first, letting the dog sniff her hand. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Lucas and Clara walked the grounds together as staff helped Bailey acclimate to the new space. Clara explained the sanctuary's mission, not only to care for retired therapy animals, but also to offer grief counseling and emotional support for veterans, widows, and children who had lost family. "Your story sparked something," Clara said. "People read what you wrote online and flooded our inboxes asking how they could help. You didn't just tell a story, Lucas. You opened a doorway." Lucas had written the post late one night, unable to sleep after holding the photo of his 5-year-old self beside Bailey. He'd written about memory, pain, and how something as simple as a paw on your hand could steady an entire life. He never expected it to go viral. Shared tens of thousands of times, translated into other languages, and even read aloud at a therapy conference in Boston. The response had been overwhelming. Letters from parents who'd lost children, from veterans haunted by war, from people who hadn't felt love in years, but said Bailey's story gave them hope. Donations poured in, and with them, the idea of a new program, Companion Legacy, became real. That night, after the final meeting, Lucas walked with Bailey down a gravel path beneath a sky heavy with stars. The air was cool, the silence peaceful. He sat on a wooden bench near the main building, and Bailey climbed up beside him, no longer the cautious therapy dog, but a friend, a companion, a piece of his past finally returned. Bailey rested her chin on his knee and looked up at him with those ancient eyes. Lucas whispered, "We're not going to be separated again. I promise." Bailey licked his hand, slow and gentle, then closed her eyes. In a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, sometimes a dog, silent, patient, and loyal, is the only one who reminds us of who we once were. The story of Lucas and Bailey isn't just about a lost bond rediscovered. It's about proof that love, memory, and connection can transcend time. Not all miracles come with thunder or angelic choirs. Sometimes, a miracle is simply a familiar gaze, a gentle touch, or a soft lick on the hand beneath the fading light, like a whisper from God saying, "I never left you." God doesn't always answer with lightning. Sometimes, He sends us someone who remembers, someone who waits. Bailey was not just a dog, she was grace wrapped in golden fur. Through her, Lucas remembered not just the past, but the love that shaped him, the mother who sacrificed for him, and the faith that was never truly lost. Their story is a gentle reminder. Healing doesn't always arrive loud. It often comes through quiet loyalty, through waiting, through returning. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever lost someone or a part of yourself, believe this: God may be holding on to something just for you. A person, a dog, a place, a promise. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a small miracle in your life? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more healing stories, just like this one. And if you believe God still works through silent love, gentle eyes, and old memories, type Amen in the comments.